Now that the floor is sealed and painted, let's rebuild it better than before. Welcome to the Hippie Geeks and our Skoolie Conversion Soul the Sun Chaser. Let's dig into this week's project. As we have mentioned before, our bus doesn't have any wheel wells protruding up into the living space. While that is amazing from a layout perspective, it has led to an interesting situation by the driver's seat and engine doghouse. The main floor area steps down into a channel that is level with the top step. The driver's seat then steps up a couple of inches above that, and on the other side the stairs go down to the door. It feels like wasted potential, so we are going to rebuild it and hopefully gain a little more floor space. I have already measured everything out, cut the wood, and dry fit it together just to be sure that what I wanted to do was even going to work. The first pieces going in are going to be the extents of the new flooring, and you can see that we will be adding quite a bit more space to our living area. We are gaining 6 inches behind the driver's seat and then filling in a considerable amount of space where the walkway entrance used to be. The plan is to fill that area with insulation up to the level of the main floor, then having plywood subfloor continue over the top and tie it all together. To connect the new wood pieces to the bus, we are using Tech wood-to-metal self-tapping screws. They are amazing and do a great job holding things together. Before using them though, make sure to go under the bus and verify the areas you are screwing into do not have some vital piece of equipment that will get destroyed. With that warning out of the way, let's get back to the construction. You may have noticed that most of the new floor supports are notched. The reason for this is that I do not want to see the plywood edge at the stairs once it is in there. The notch is cut to the depth of our plywood, which will support it along the edge, but also leave it looking very clean as you walk up into the bus. Once I had the framework installed and I was sure it was going to work the way I wanted it to, it was time to start getting the insulation and subfloor installed. To maximize interior height, we decided to go with 1-inch thick panels of XPS foam. I cut them about 1/8 of an inch shorter than the width of the bus as I wanted the fit to be snug, but with enough space to account for variation in the width of the open space. I also wanted to make sure that the seams of the foam and the plywood did not line up, so I cut the first piece of foam in half, leaving me with a 2-foot wide by 7.5 foot long section. Once the piece was in the bus and on the floor, I had to get it cut to fit the weird geometry that was going on by the rear door. The corners are rounded, and the door comes out further than the back wall. I made several measurements and marked it on the foam with a Sharpie, then cut it out with a razor blade. I made sure that it slid perfectly in place, then pulled it back out so that I could use it as a template for the first piece of plywood. We decided to use 3/4 inch thick, tongue and groove plywood for our subfloor. I set the foam on top of it and then traced out the areas that I needed to cut, which was a great way to do it as I don't want to move these sheets of plywood more than I have to. They are really freaking heavy. Luckily, with the way the wheelchair door is set up, I can just barely angle a 4-foot wide piece of plywood so that it will slide in under the chair rails that run the length of the bus. The foam can be bent enough to pop in, but there is no way you are going to be able to bend plywood and make it work. I slid the plywood into place, and it fit perfectly, which means that we were ready to move on to the next step, getting the foam and plywood glued down to the floor. We settled on using Loctite PL Premium Adhesive after way too much online research. The problem with a lot of adhesives is that they will melt XPS instead of adhering to it, but I can verify that the PL Premium will work perfectly. Now, we are not going to be screwing our subfloor down to the metal floor. I do not want to punch any holes into our freshly sealed floor that I don't have to, and I really don't want the screws acting as a thermal bridge into the living space. With that in mind, I used a lot of the adhesive. It is not cheap at just under $5 a tube when you buy it in bulk, but I want to make sure that everything stays attached to the floor. With the glue on the floor, it was time to get the first 2-foot section of foam set in place. Once I had it slid all the way in, I put a bead of adhesive along the entire edge and then along the space where the next full-side board of foam will go and slid it into place. Now that those were down, it was time to get the first piece of plywood on. Because we had already made sure that it would fit in perfectly, there were no surprises and it went right into place. At this point, things started going pretty quickly, which is good because it was starting to get dark. I installed another section of foam board, followed by another section of plywood. The tongue and groove can be a bit of a pain to fit together, but working it carefully and everything should go together eventually. Once we had everything installed that we could for the day, we got all of our weights on there to keep it stuck together while it dried. We used a couple of pieces of furniture and a lot of bags of concrete to hold it all down, and it worked great. We let the glue cure for around 36 hours, then came back in to do the next sections. The foam went in easily, but the plywood didn't want to pop in as easily as the other ones had. It eventually got in there though, and it was slid up and glued to the foam. We were able to get one more section of foam and another plywood sheet in the bus, but then we ran out of weights, so we had to leave the adhesive to cure for another 36 hours before we could move on to the final sections. We have now made it up far enough that we need to deal with those deeper areas. What we decided to do was cut sections of foam board to fit and just stack and glue them up to the level of the floor. Amazingly, with exactly 5 stacks of foam, we were able to bring the levels up to match the floor level. Some of the areas were trickier than others, and we were trying to minimize waste by using up the scraps we had left over. Eventually though, they were all filled in and we got back to putting in the rest of the insulation and subfloor. The last small section of foam board went in. I cut it to fit but don't seem to have recorded it. However, you can see it sitting there up against the boards that we had installed. This section of plywood really did not want to go together, but eventually with some coaxing it finally did, and I was able to weigh it down. That brings us to the last section of subfloor, which is going to need some figuring. I measured what the maximum depth would be and cut it to make it easier to work with. After sliding it all the way to the front of the bus, I reached underneath and traced the line of the supports beneath. After accounting for the depth of the notch in the wood, I cut it to match and it fit in perfectly, which was a really good feeling. It fit together exactly like I hoped it would, and it looked great. We let it sit for another 36 hours to cure and then emptied the bus out. At this point, we ended up spray foaming the bus, which you can see in the wall panels. That is going to be talked about on the next video though, so let's just ignore it for now. It was time to get the floor cleaned up and sealed and ready for paint. The adhesive had come up through some of the seams, and I wanted to make sure that the entire surface was clean, so I hit it with the palm sander. After that is another little bit that didn't get filmed. I caulked every seam and then all of the edges of the plywood to help seal it in. We then hit it with some mist-tinted primer that we picked up for super cheap and put down a couple of coats of yellow on the subfloor. Not the Rust-Oleum this time, we used an exterior grade Valspar paint, which is great to work with. We love it, it looks spectacular, and the additional square footage will be welcome when we finally start putting things into the bus. If this is your first time here visiting Soul the Sun Chaser, it would be wonderful to have you subscribe. Hopefully, digging into this project with us will help you dig into your projects. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and check out our Patreon page or merch store to support the channel directly. Until next time, keep seeking adventure, chasing the sun.